is an interesting story we have today. We have the combination of technology and contracts, commercial arrangements. I will focus on Belgium, Germany, Poland, and the Netherlands for a simple reason. Belgium is a nice example of what regulators can do wrong. Germany and Poland are the center for Europe and the center for the developments in Europe. And the Netherlands is the smallest country you can imagine below the sea. And it had to improvise on many developments. I shortly will try to paint to you. Next slide, please. Like Frans Willem said, many things are going on. And it will take many hours to go only to the top of those issues. I will discuss with you several developments, but mainly one thing will not change. When you are an industry, you are a consumer or you are a generator of energy. If you don't do anything, depending on the market, you will be a consumer or a generator. And prices might rise, prices may go down. It depends on your position whether you're going to benefit from those developments or not. And it might depend on your shareholders, perhaps it's your own company, whether you will benefit of it or not. The energy markets are opening up. It used to be for about 150 years since we started the electrification of the energy markets that there was one vertical integrated monopoly. Every country in the European Union, but still in most countries over the world, are vertical integrated monopolies. I specifically focus on electricity because of the electrification of what we see around us for consumers, households, and industries. In those vertical integrated monopolies, mostly the state was the owner of large generation, the distribution, the grid, so to say, and they also determined what prices people and companies were expected to pay. They were really monopolies. And they could be so because, especially after the Second World War in Europe, it were the governments who had to make the investments, huge investments for coal-fired power plants. And every country had several of those big, large coal-fired power plants. Later on, you got gas-fired power plants, and all those monopolies worked on rather well because in Europe there was a big development for electrification. And then things started to change by technology, but also by the wishes of those consumers. And the developments were, you no longer needed to be very big to become your own generator. You could do it yourself. And the market changed. They started to change in the Netherlands rather late, in 1998. And in the UK, they started at the beginning of the 90s of last century. Now we see in Germany and Poland quite some developments, and also in other countries in the European Union. I'll come back to it later, but the European Union is very clear in its message. If you don't do it yourself, expect some very unpleasant surprises. Industry and demand and industry supply is on the rise. Like I said, it's now much easier to generate your own power than it was 10, 20 years ago. It was much easier to become your own supplier, to make sure that you benefit of your own consumption of generation than it was in the past. And especially where you see big industrial clusters of industries, it is interesting to start cooperating. There are still quite some difficulties in Europe. When I focus on Spain, on France, on Italy, I see still large energy companies. When I mention Mitsubishi, the owner of large energy companies in the Netherlands, in Eco, Sweden is Vattenfall, Germany, E.ON, and France, of course, Électricité de France, Energy de France, they still dominate the markets. And perhaps those governments will insist on the continuation of those domination. But we also see at the markets now new developments. Next slide, please. And there you see that no longer it's only those large incumbents who dominate the markets, but people start doing it themselves. So no longer centralized steering, a government that determines so-called demand and supply curves, but decentralized solutions. And it all started with industries. The moment industries started to realize that their production process is a set of cash flows, the production process is a way of making money, people started to think, how can we become more independent of those incumbents? Those incumbent energy companies, they are mainly interested for their own shareholders. But if you're an industry yourself, why don't you tap on the opportunities you have in your own production process? You make your own energy first, rather than support those international energy combinations. And there's also another development. What we saw in the last 10 to 15 years in Europe, that financial regulators started to look in the operations of those large energy utilities and the consequences of their dominance for the end users. Financial supervisory agency said to the German utilities that they were quite they were financed in a very intriguing way and not as it should be, that they had big risks and that they wanted their clients to countervail for those risks. I will not bother you with how boring financial supervisory rules can be, but it's changing the markets. Another thing that is changing the markets is data and speed. What we now can do with data collection, with our databases, you couldn't dream of 20 years ago. And even 3 to 4 years ago, your databases were quite still slow. Nowadays, what we can do with web services, it's amazing. You can have more data to your own discretion than the large industry incumbents had it 10 years ago. Next slide, please. So it's time to start to think of how do you take control and how do you invest in new technology. You need to understand the technology in your company. If you don't, well, probably you weren't in your business too long anymore. But if you do and you understand your business, and most entrepreneurs do understand their business, you can now make investments that weren't possible some years ago. And they are not that expensive, because always bear in mind, sustainable forms of energy will bring you more profit than the fossil ways of energy, the old ways of energy. If you want to be in control, if you want to be flexible, it makes you more profit to rely on yourself, on savings to start with, and to benefit from your own generation capacity and from your own consumption patterns. Next slide, please. You need to know, how do you deal with your energy position? Where do you buy your energy? For what consumption do you buy your energy? And for what generation could you buy your energy? And it might be the experience of some of you that large utilities are not the most client-focused companies there are on the world. And at the same time, there's a huge change in all technological developments. The metering, the sensors, Stefano is going to spend more time on it. It's great what you can do. It doesn't cost that much money. It costs you time and it costs you space in your brain. If you don't use your brain, it doesn't matter what kind of technological changes you make in your production process, it's not going to benefit you. But if you use the opportunities there are, you will benefit from it. There's another pressing concern why you should start thinking about the developments of the energy markets, the climate change concerns. They are no longer only concerns of some politicians. They are now vested into law. If you don't change your production process and you are an energy intensive company and you affect the climate change, you will have to pay for it dearly. And you will pay for it dearly unless you start to take control about your own energy opportunity. The governments in Europe, European Union, the European Commission especially, are now focusing on what you need to do on your own efforts for climate change control. That means also further liberalization. Liberalization is normally a term for politicians, but it means that other players will come to the market and will start offering services you wouldn't think possible for a couple of years ago. There is an open access to the energy markets. And let's face it, the energy market is no longer only the Netherlands or only Poland or only Spain. Europe is connected. Frans Willem was mentioning Texas. You will not see the Texas situation that soon in Europe. Texas was like an island. There is no island in Europe. But it also means for you as an industry, if you don't act and follow the developments, you will be late. And as an energy intensive company, that might cost you dearly. Next screen, please. Our advice is simple, quite boring. You need to start with two things: technical improvements and be aware of the commercial arrangements you are in. Technical improvements, I'm a lawyer by background, so what do we know about technology? Not that much. We know quite something about data, but not about the real hard, interesting stuff. But two suggestions: installing new interconnections and implementing smart energy technology. So making you yourself in charge of your energy position is a very good start to focus on the other leg, the commercial improvements. Have you ever checked your contracts with your utilities? Have you ever checked the contracts you have with grid companies or with other agencies involved in the country where you're active in? If you really want to be energy efficient, it may be worthwhile to start selling power surplus to your neighbor. Or if you want to do something with storage that you can buy from somewhere else or to sell to someone else. And in that way, you start improving your operational profits you couldn't think about several years ago. Next slide, please. Europe is boring, is expensive, and is pressing. If you see those 5 bullets, from energy performance in buildings to electricity market design, and you don't think about it, you might lose out on that market. And that market is big. The European Commission expects the total amount of investments to be around 1 trillion euros. It's quite a lot of money. But the transition away from fossil fuels towards cleaner energy is clear. It's going to happen. It's not only going to happen because politicians want it, but it's going to bring money to those people who are really committed to reducing those greenhouse gas emissions, because they realize they are entrepreneurs. You can make money out of it. Governments in Europe focus on it, focus clearly on it. You will see new energy laws, any member state in the European Union. Energy efficiency and capturing renewable energy is going to be key in it. If you're not able to measure your performance, if you don't have the contractual openness to start operating in this area, it's going to be difficult. Electricity market design, energy market design is a very clear message. Everyone can do it. Everyone should do it. And everyone should be responsible for their own energy positions. Now, talking about those positions, next slide, please. This is basically it. Who pays whom in the electricity system? The consumer, from a financial perspective, that's a short position. And they have generation, that's a long position from a financial perspective. And any one of you is sometimes a consumer and sometimes a generator. Because bear in mind, if you have a contract, but you don't consume under that contract, someone is going to sell out of that contract. So financially, the generation position can offer financial opportunities, just like the consumer perspective. And wherever you go, and we work in quite some countries, there's always a function called, in most countries, supplier, or a similar term, or a balancing responsible party. That's the trading party. Keep it simple. The supplier is your administrative office, and the balancing responsible party is the trading. The trading who is in most jurisdictions responsible for having the contacts with independent system operator to make sure that everything is balanced. The independent system operator is the balancing authority, and the BRP is the entity in charge of submitting programs enabling the ISO to keep the system in balance. And wherever you are, there is a taxman. The tax authorities on quite a growing chunk of your tax, of your energy bill. And you need to pay your local grid. If you do not know how much you consume or how much you generate, you do not know how much you are paying to the local grid or how much you need to pay to the tax authorities. So you better know it yourself, or the tax authorities are going to determine how much money you need to pay. And the local grid will determine how much you need to pay. And be very simple. if you are an energy intensive industry and you have neighbors, why don't you become your own supplier and your own BRP? These are the functions you will find everywhere. From Europe, US, Africa, everywhere in Asia, everywhere there's always someone who sends out an invoice and there's always someone who is trading. Bear this in mind, who pays whom in the electricity system. And you will understand that having the combination of technological improvements and contractual freedom is giving you a very good position. Next slide, please. Clean energy has a clear message. Energy saving is making money. You need to do something because the deregulation won't stop. New market rules will come up and you have a choice. You can make your assets work for your own profits, or you start supporting with your money, with your energy assets, the local energy utility, the local energy company, like it was the last 50 years. But investing in energy saving equipment combined with insight and access to the market is key to profit. Understanding those clear functions and who pays whom will be the start for you and your company for hopefully being profitable in this new market era where market prices might go up, might go down, just like in any other normal market, and it can be good for you. Thanks for your attention, and if you have any questions, please do so at the end.